Okay, so how much time do you spend doing stuff that you're not hired for? And worse, how many times you are not able to do the stuff you're paid for because you're blocked by a missing resource or tooling? And finally, how many times did such a situation push you to skimp on quality, validation, or documentation and disappointed yourself and your stakeholders? This was actually what happened to us when we started at TripActions 2 years ago. And in order to be able to grade the data team from 4 to 24 in a space of a year and answer the needs of the booming organization, we just didn't have a choice not to address these questions. And if we hadn't, we'd probably not be talking to you today, as we would be firefighting against the flaws of our own stack. So each time we considered, how can we do more with less by working in a smarter way? The good thing is that we didn't hire specifically for this, and chances are that you and your team already have the right people in place to tackle these issues. So if there is one thing to take away from this talk, is that you should not do any of the things that we did. You really just have to bring up the few questions we started with, and you'll find your own way to supercharge your data team. Slides. So let's get in the flow. This talk will tell a story of how we get from raw data to insights in an efficient, reliable, and scalable way. This is much less about the solutions we built than it is about the problems they are solving for. And as Claire mentioned, if you're interested in the more technical stuff, we're more than happy to discuss it in the Slack channel. So who we are, what we do. At TripActions, we truly believe that in-person connections are powerful. That's why we make it easy for travelers to focus on where they're going instead of how to get there, by building a modern travel solution which satisfies today's travelers' needs. We're a global company headquartered in California with offices all around the globe. We service companies with range from small businesses to Fortune 100s in a wide diversity of industries, supporting more than 1 million travelers. Sorry. Data at TripActions. So first thing first, thanks to real heroes, Bastien and I are just here to take credit for all the awesome work that the team did. Special thank you to Virginia, Alberto, Yuri, and Rob on the engineering side, and of course to all other team members for their ideas and feedback in this iterative process. Who's the data team? Basically, one team, a bunch of people, global, with complementary expertise. We like to see ourselves as a team of teams, partnering with the rest of the org. And to hear more about how we work exactly, stay tuned. There is a fireside chat coming later on. On the data science side, so they work closely with stakeholders in product and operations to improve the product itself through personalization and empower the stakeholders in their day-to-day decision-making through automation and machine learning in the cloud. BI at TripActions is complementary. The analyst mission is to enable every employee with data. Everyone should have the data they need when they need it, and regardless of their technical skills. Self-service is our dream, and as you can see by the numbers, we're getting there. Our vision, 3 main pillars, one source of truth, 100% of the business logic lives in the repository. Keep it dry, don't repeat yourself. Every piece of logic is written once and used in many places. And anyone, literally anyone, can contribute, including non-data team individuals, understanding models, end-to-end in an autonomous way. We want people to be enabled, do what they're good at, and do more with less.
All right, so now that we have this vision in mind, we have to build a data stack that goes with that. So, I have this little dreaming picture here, because let's dream a little bit about what that might translate as. And often that's, what we think you'll end up building. You'll end up building something that's really nice and fun and beautiful and zen, right? You'll be agile, you'll be able to add new data sources, implement regulation and compliance. People will trust your data. You will be able to enable them to self-serve most of the time, so that you free up most of your time to really answer the needs of a demanding customer or a demanding stakeholder and really bring creative value. That is the dream. In reality, achieving that dream is not trivial. For example, this is a handful of the sources that we connect to TripActions. You have to bring every single of these sources into your data warehouse, data lake, and all of these things are different APIs. They have different update schedules, different quirks, and all of that stuff. So even orchestrating that can be in itself a big thing. And then you have to figure out how to expose these transformations, as you've done in your Snowflake instance or database instance, whatever, into BI tools like Tableau or Metabase, or feed them to ML models, also known as magic. One of the things that we see already is this is already quite complex. There are a lot of endpoints, both on the left and on the right side. And when you think that that is already complicated enough, you have to think that your ML models are probably going to flow back into your data warehouse, and then you're going to want to make the decisions from your models and the metrics flow back into some of your system that people are using in operations. Orchestrating this is not trivial at all, and usually the tools that you are given to achieve this have, at least for a long while, been something a little bit like this. Some gaffer tape, a paperclip, and some bubble gum. And while that worked really well for a guy in the 80s, 90s with a mullet, MacGyver, for the ones who didn't get the reference because they are far younger than me, it turns out that when building data pipelines, that doesn't really work so well. It doesn't really work so well in real life also. I found out very soon as a kid. So usually what you end up with when you build data pipelines with the wrong tools or the wrong questions in mind is something a little bit like this, right? It's really complex, highly coupled, it's not really pretty, and it probably doesn't really work. And the worst thing about this is maintaining such a pipeline, and that's not even thinking about getting value out of it, is actually probably going to require one or two people whose full-time job is going to be on patching these things and who have to know exactly all of the pieces and how they fit together. And obviously, in fast-paced environments that we are today, that doesn't really work so well. So we are going to tell you how we approach this problem, and we'll take it from the raw materials, getting the data in, to exposing the data to our stakeholders as it goes. And we'll talk to you about, we'll start with getting the data flowing. So if we take that diagram back in here, for most of our guys, most of this, we will call them like stable systems, the systems that we regularly hook up to, we use PipelineWise. It's an open source tool that is great because it's open source, so it's free. But the great thing about it is that it's extensible. And so we maintain our own fork where we have baked in extra logic around monitoring, because we'd really rather find out soon rather than later that something is broken or not working. And we've also baked in a lot of functionality to help data engineers, but very soon anyone in the team, to hook up or add a new source with very minimal amount of code. And then you have parts of the business that also work on maybe less stable APIs, or who might want to have their Google Sheets ingested into the database so that you can build a report on top of it. And this, for a while, we just basically built a bunch of Python script that connect to the Google Sheet and import it. And sometimes we did it well, sometimes we did it not so well. But the main problem here is that it was a blocker. An analyst is not necessarily very proficient in Python, although that's obviously evolving and changing. And they would be blocked constantly to, trying to have somebody to help them to do a quick view on some table, right? That should be easy, right? Do a quick view. That's usually what you hear. So it's what started as a kind of a weekend project ended up being a few months project, but it's a tool that I built that's called Sheetwork, and I have to give the credit to the GitLab team for sort of inspiring the name, but it also fit very well with the team, because we have a couple of French people who don't really make the difference between E and E. I'm struggling also. So, it leads into funny conversations. What this tool allows us to do is really anyone can just run a simple command such as sheet work upload, sheet name test sheet, and have their sheet ingested into Snowflake. It supports over 40 daily imports. We tried not to rely too much on it because if something is going to be used in that environment for very long, we should build a more sustainable pipeline, but it's there. And all the code-like stuff that you have to do is write a little YAML description. For those of you who use dbt, you'll probably recognize the structure. And the reason for this is because I kind of stole all of the design principles of dbt because it's so great. So another good thing, I'm going to do a shameless plug. It's open source, and I really, really would love for more people to use it than our team. It currently talks to Snowflake, but it's extensible to talk to any database. And I'm sure there are many, many bugs that we haven't run into, and it'd be great to have a few users. So feel free to look into it. So now that we've sorted out our ingest problem in a quite extensible and sustainable way, this opens a door really for a lot of dream and for data engineers to focus on building tools that help us work better, and for the analysts and the data scientists to focus on their problems, what they're really good at. And that's a theme that we'll keep on repeating, is how do we make sure that we make you do what you're the best at rather than fixing a pipeline that's broken. So we will talk to you how we develop, and I'm going to give it to Jeff to share a bit what we do to prepare and our vision around development.
Yeah, so now that the data is in our system, that's where the hard work begins. But like before actually coding, let's make sure we have the right setup. So thanks to Ben, we know that by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. That's why we make sure that we are all well geared up, right? So first, we start with the IDE and terminal. We all use the same IDE. We all install the same standard extensions to make the most out of them. Some are open source, others are from our own creation. And all our terminals are automatically configured via an Ansible setup script, including credentials to Snowflake. On the database side, we want to prevent breaking the bank and dropping or altering production tables. Our Snowflake instance is set up so that each contributor has access to a separate development database in which they can test their models. They use production tables because we clone the production table in their dev so that they have access to fresh data, and they have their own computing power, which can auto-scale and which is separated from the one running production jobs. We also want to make sure that we all follow the same standards in coding, and as such, we have a very strong naming convention at every stage of the development, up till the repository structure, as you will see in the future. All of this around dbt. So what does it mean in real life? We work close to the truth. Let's analysts use the data and directly test against prod to measure their impacts. We make it super easy to validate, but hard to fail. Tooling should make it so that mistakes are almost impossible to do, and anyone can commit with confidence. We always test and document. No change should be deployed without documentation and test in the first place. And combining tooling, process, and education allows anyone to confidently and continuously make changes to core data models. High level, before we go into too many details, this is the life cycle of a code change. So most changes begin with a Jira ticket to track the development and manage stakeholder communication. Then all contributors develop in dbt. 100% of the transformation are built there. Once done, locally, all contributors use an automated suite which helps them check their code works, run tests, add documentations. More to come, Bastien will talk about it. Then GitHub with automated checks for general code quality, formatting, dependencies, etc. And finally, we also give a PR status update in Slack to allow minimum waiting for reviews and minimum distractions for reviewers. We strongly believe in putting most of the quality check in the hands of the developer. Why should we wait for the PR to hit GitHub to know that it's broken? People should know, be comfortable with, and own what they do. So as teased earlier, we take naming very seriously at TripActions. It's at every step we take. For us, it starts from the repository structure. As a contributor, you shouldn't spend hours looking for where to capture the business logic you have in mind, or find the piece of code you want to edit, or worse, choose randomly where to save it. Every piece of code should be saved where it belongs. That's why every object, DBT project, repository folder, models, columns, what have you, is named carefully and in a standard way. Note that while this is extremely helpful for the contribution, this also enhances tremendously the findability of our code in the self-service BI tools, as we are also leveraging DBT schema creation feature. Keep in mind, our goal is to enable everyone with data.
All right. So now that we are all geared up, prepared, we have those conventions in mind, we have the right tool. Supposedly, DBT is a great tool, so it's not just the right tool. We have one problem in this equation is that we are human, and humans are really, really good at solving problems creatively, understanding business needs, and all of that stuff. But they really suck at remembering to be systematic and consistent, and that happens often when you are under pressure to deliver something quite fast, right? And in the life cycle of a code change in your data warehouse, you have to remember to, well, run your model, know what's the impact of your model on downstream dependencies, so probably run that. Run your tests to make sure that you haven't violated assumptions before. Enforce new tests, validate your new assumptions, and then document the changes. And all of this is, supported and really, really made nicely in DBT. But you have to still remember to make all of these things happen. So in this attempt to make it easy to develop and hard to fail, we ended up, and that wasn't just one night, we'll talk about this at the end of the talk, but we developed a tool that we named, funnily, the DBT Executor 9000. So futuristic, postmodern. I'm sure Drew would be happy. And what it does is basically remove the developer to have to remember to do all of these things. And it's basically a wrapper around DBT that's going to call the right steps at the right moment. It'll figure out the dependencies that your model is impacting using the graph, run the DBT tests, offer you some validation in an interactive fashion, and then allow you to populate your documentation, and again in an automated fashion, so you don't have to go back and forth between YAML files. So let's go through a quick run through of how this works. This works very simply. People have to remember to write one command. DBT executor, some info about the model and the project that we're using, and some flags that say, I want to validate and I want to use my dev environment. And what this kicks in is first a run of the models. If you need to run dependent models, it'll figure it out for you. And then it'll kick in the tests. And if those tests pass, you go into the validation flow. There's a lot of text on here, but you really only have to focus on a few of these things. What it does is, because, as we said, each developer has their copy of production database, we can basically figure out, okay, you're modifying that table in your environment. Let me compare it to the prod one. And then I'll put you a few stats around it. So in that case, I deleted a column. So it tells me, there are 14 columns in your table, 15 on prod. And it will run some very basic row counts to make sure that, you haven't exploded the table with like a really bad job. It, of course, doesn't stop there. It gives you a summary of all the changes in the column, such as data types and all of that stuff. And then you can run some more advanced testing. Maybe you have some assumptions that you want to test on a particular column. For example, in that column, I want to make sure that I have no variance or very little. So I can say, okay, I want you to run some basic tests on this. If I wanted, I could write a where clause, because maybe I have some different assumptions. And I could write that in this interactive flow. And then I could say, I'm going to allow a certain amount of variance, because sometimes that's okay. In that case, because I want to keep it positive, everything worked. And so I get a very rewarding green message that says there are no variances found, which is great. So we can move on to the next step. The next step is you get an even more rewarding scorecard. This scorecard basically summarizes everything that has happened, what you have run, what are the models that are impacted, what are the rows, and the results of the test you've done. Remember about that scorecard, it'll come in very handy, but it is really nice because by this point, you have an idea of what you tested and what's the state of things. I forgot there was some animations, so let me go through these animations really quickly. The last part of it is documentation. Documentation is super important. If you want to have self-serve, you got to have documentation. People have to know what you mean and have to know where to find things. As we mentioned, I think like in some of the talks yesterday, discoverability is a big thing, and that helps. So what we have is a tool that basically parses the schema of YAML. So we're just leveraging DBT technology here, but it kind of gives you an interactive flow to populate it. We have one very, very strong assumption, and it's around the one source of truth and keep it dry, is that one field should be documented once and only once, and it should mean the same thing across all of your models. If it doesn't, either you are naming your field incorrectly, or you have a problem with maybe your concept about it. So ensuring this it's important to standardize it. So one of the steps is, you can offer a documentation to the model. In that case, there was already one, so it shows it to me. I can change it if I want to, if I think it's not great. In that case, I'm just going to press enter, so go to the next one. And it tells me, okay, this table that you're acting on has 14 columns documented, and one of them is not documented. So it shows me here the ones that are not documented, but you could show the rest also. And I can choose to document that column. Why not? So I'll just say, okay, I'm going to document column 0 on this table. And this is the next part of the flow. It's screen caps. But I'm just going to say, okay, this is my new beautiful column. I'm going to press enter, and the tool is going to remember about this. And then, tests are super important. You need to enforce them as soon as you can. So what the tool does also is give you an option of a few common tests that we run. Some of them are built-ins, but you could, surface any of your tests in macros or packages. In that case, I'm going to apply the not null test, so test number 2. And it's not just about entering that test on the YAML, but you want to make sure that test actually is running and not failing. So when I say, okay, add test number 2, the test is going to be run. And if it completes successfully, then we add the test. If it fails, we know it fails, and it means we can exit that flow and then go back into the model and make some changes. Again, the idea is to bring all the control before it hits the PR. And we'll talk about what we think about PRs later. So that's when we deploy and monitor. We've documented, we are pretty confident that our changes are correct. We are ready to get it reviewed. And the review process for us is not a gatekeeping process at all. That's a poor use of review. Review is important because it's a moment where you can enhance things, make things better. And if you want this quality of review, you have to make the review easy. So you don't want to have unclarities, things that are not systematic. You want to make sure that it hits the review at the stage that is almost mergeable. So we put a lot of the stuff in front of before we commit. So for example, style and formatting is done in pre-commits, and then we have a naming convention or PRs to kind of disclose the scope a little bit of what's going to happen. And then we heavily use code owners to identify the right people who might be able to review that part of the code. And we'll come back to also the code owners later. Code owners is a function that you can implement in GitHub, and it automatically populate the reviewers, and it's done in like 1 minute. We also enforce a PR template that's pretty opinionated, and that kind of systematizes the amount of information that you want to provide. And here, in how has this change been tested? Well, maybe you can insert your scorecard here so that you don't have to talk about it again with your reviewer. The reviewer knows, and you know that you've provided enough information, and you don't have discussions of like, did you test this? Because that's really annoying. That's a waste of time. As a reviewer, you don't want to have to ask this. And as a reviewee, maybe you run the test. So you don't want to be like, yeah, of course I ran my tests, I'm great. So that's one of the things. And then we have a checklist to kind of remember of some of the things that are a bit harder to automate. Again, the idea is when the reviewer is notified, they can focus on what they are good at, giving you feedback that will enhance your model. We use Slack, we mentioned this heavily to kind of monitor the life cycle of everything. When your PR is created, it lands in a channel. And because we use code owners, we have a little bot that goes around and tags the PRs for you based on those code owners, so that you don't have to chase people up. People are not already notified. And then they go and review. And when they request changes, you are notified, which is great. And if all of it goes well, you end up merging your PR. When you merge your PR, you as a developer are almost done, because we have a tool that is going to trigger a smart deploy. I'm not going to go into it very much today, but happy to answer more questions in the chat. The idea is figuring out which models you really need to run, because you don't want to rerun your entire DAG. That's super long and expensive for every change. And we leverage the naming convention quite heavily to decide on this. The smart deployer is deploying. And of course, you want to know when your model is deployed so you can start using that. So again, we have this deployer like tags into Slack what's being deployed. And if it's working fine, you get this kind of message. And sometimes there are still errors. You know, it can happen. And in that case, you'll get a notification about an error. We really want to make it easy for people to react to errors. We don't want to have a message from somebody in marketing or finance 3 days later, your data is wrong, or the dashboard looks weird. We want to find out early. And to enable being early, we have to provide all of the context that allow people to dive into it. And so we get the compiled SQL from a dbt, because it's great. And then we put it in a little button so people can just go and hit and then have the code in their IDE and start debugging. We have the same amount of monitoring for tests, which we rerun periodically. And when tests break, when assumptions change, we are also notified, again, so that we prevent as many times as possible having the data wrong. With that, I'm going to leave it to Jeff to talk to you about how we share all of these great work to the rest of the world in the company. So, Jeff.
Cool. Thanks. So now that we have solid foundations on our side, we still need to bring that up to the rest of the world, because down the line, this is what the people in the organization care about. So how do we prevent all this work to go to dust? Thanks to all the effort we just described, we are now super happy, right? We have our data is fresh, clean, normalized, tested, monitored, documented. It follows dry principles, like people can contribute, anyone can contribute, but this is not enough. We still need to bring this data to our end users in the BI tools. And here we face the same old demons. Critical reports subject to manual errors, inconsistencies between reports, duplication of logic. The same logic is repeated over and over again by a different person, again exposing us to inconsistencies, etc. So let's follow the same success recipe that we just saw before. One source of truth, 100% of the business logic should live in code. Kind of stubborn here, but in Tableau it means that we don't use custom SQL as published data sources, but rather published data sources which are plugged directly on top of our marks, which live in the code. Keep it dry. In an ideal world, in Tableau, we want one data source to rule them all. It's not possible. So for us, it translates into a curated number of published data sources, which answers the vast majority of the questions. And then anyone can BI. Data exploration is made easy. Data sources are extremely clean. All fields are documented, tied in folders with default formatting and aggregation. Standard reports follow the shared best practices to make them as insightful and intuitive as possible. And we also enable anyone to build their own. But wait, as an experienced data people, as we all are, you probably have a lot of questions. Like, how do you ensure the same engineering principles with Tableau? How do you ensure analysts answer ad hoc requests in a timely manner while maintaining the demanding data team standards? How do you make sure there is no duplication of work, etc.? Well, similar to what worked for the code, we learned from engineering success principle and wrote our own ultimate guide for analysts. It basically helped us know what to do, when to do it, where to do it, and how to do it. Key things here are we always start with understanding the business needs before doing anything. Always take this as an opportunity to promote and improve self-serve, and always keep it dry. The higher up in the code, the better. So think about the long-term solution, not just the problem at stake. Same recipe, same workflow. The only difference here is instead of dbt, we use Tableau in the process. Same, again, we have our own repository only for Tableau data sources with standard PR naming conventions, same. A checklist for the reviewee and the reviewer. Remember, we're all humans. And we have a super sick feature because Tableau data sources down the line an XML file, which is extremely hard to read for any human being. So to counter this, we automatically generated sample data source using the file and drop a link to it in the PR description directly, so that for the reviewer, they can redirect to a new Tableau workbook in which they can see the sample data source in action, play with it, build quick visualization, piece of cake to review. Once approved, same automated smart deployment, which triggers like, it basically takes care of all the backend work. So it embeds credentials, clean naming formats, attach documentation from the code base itself, define once, as Bastien mentioned earlier. It generates the extract, publish it. As for the code, we bring a status update in Slack. And once the new data source is published, the sample one is automatically deleted to clean the Tableau backends. All clean. But so how do we basically make the connection between the code base and the BI tools? Like, what if I change something in the code base? Which reports are going to be affected? Well, first, we are notified. We use Slack heavily. We are notified that the workbook or the data source is broken. It contains an error description when it last failed, a link to it so that you can easily troubleshoot. But then, and better, we have exposure to the rescue. This key feature closes the gap. All the data world is connected from API, source, up until the BI environment. So now at a glance, we know what endpoints are impacted when any upstream changes happen. Thank you, DBT. So super happy. Let's all retire now. But everything is automated and under control. But before that, we actually have one last thing to do. As you can see through this speech, data engineers aren't bottleneck anymore. They have become true like enablers for and with the entire data team, enabling any team member and outside to do more with data. And likewise, we want anyone to get the data insights they need. So if we do our job correctly, the data team could retire with peace of mind. Everyone would get the data they need to make the decisions without even knowing we even exist. So our dream is self-serve. And just imagine a world in which anyone across the entire organization, regardless of their experience and technical skills, could access all the insights they need to make their decisions, all of it by themselves, and as easy as pouring a beer. Sometimes could still be challenging, I admit, but well, this is what we aim at. So basically, how do we do it? The raw material, data, and supply chain are of extremely good quality. It's the slide before. Sorry, Bastien.
Sorry.
So how do we do it? The raw material, the data, and its supply chain are of extremely good quality, super solid, as we just described. Data is available. This raw material is shaped into very user-friendly reports, which help anyone to explore the key business areas, and also serves as inspiration for ambitious self-explorers. And this material is also accessible raw for anyone to explore. People are enabled and supported by training and support. Think about training as like, okay, I give you the data, but think like, if I give you a hammer, let's just make sure you do not brush your teeth with it. So let's make the data available. So we have two main BI tools. We have Tableau and we have Metabase. They are both complementary. So Tableau serves for curated reports full of data and features to make data insights super easy with, again, strong naming conventions and documentation. Metabase, same, naming convention, documentation. We also have primary key and foreign key generation so that it's easy for them to connect Snowflake tables together without knowing necessarily how to do it. And we leverage all the work we made before on the naming conventions so that it's easy for people to know what they're playing with. Our goal is for them to become data master. We do it through 3 pillars. One is training and partnership. Our goal is to have true data ambassadors to also like open up like new doors for better reporting, basically more advanced reporting. So we have regular training suitable for every time zone. And we even have a train the trainer guides. And right now, like 70% of the company has attended BI training. Each track is recorded. Each recording is available to anyone at any time. And we also share like best practices in documentation. We hold test parties to learn from each other. Anyone is welcome. The second pillar is, and as mentioned across this presentation, documentation. We want people to, it's all in the documentation, basically. So probably the sentence I heard the most since I started in the data world. Both my worst nightmare, but so true, right? So that's why we make it dry. We make it super easy to document, and all those definitions are just populated everywhere where the field is used. And support. So we enable people to explore the data by themselves, like we make it easy through documentation, best practices, etc. But down the line, we're always here to support them. And we're always happy to jump in Slack or on Zoom to help them self-serve.
All right, we are almost at the end, and we are a little bit almost over time. I have 2 timers, and they say different things. But we'll be very quick. This is very much of a wrap-up thing, and we can follow up in the chat a little bit about these things. We talked to you about a lot of tools. And as we said, we don't have to implement all of these, but you might wonder, like, when do I start? When do I build these things? Do I need to build these things? And the answer is, probably you don't need to build exactly what we showed here today. But one of the things you probably want to do, and what triggered us to build all of this stuff, was that we regularly kind of assessed our workflow. We started with zero tooling. We had dbt and Snowflake, and everybody had access to prod, deployed their model. We still had some review, but it was very haphazard and all of that stuff. And eventually we had pain points. And so I'm going to just quickly show the timeline of how things came up a little bit. We had haphazard naming, PRs, though varying info, quality, and scope. We implemented PR conventions. Took a few minutes to communicate to the team and implement templates. Very easy. Something you can start doing from tomorrow, as my coach would tell me. And then we built the automatic deployer, because having everybody run against prod every time they make a change, collisions, but also concerns about elevated rights. And also safety, right? You don't want to drop the table on production. That would be sad. And then, we had this problem of ad hoc imports. We built Shitwork. We had inconsistent documentation. It wasn't systematic. Sometimes the names had various definitions. We built TADOC. Then we wanted to make sure that we could validate our changes in a systematic way. we built the table validator. And eventually we were like, okay, let's wrap it all in one tool so that, we don't have to think about all of this. So we've talked to you about a lot of these things. As we said, you don't have to do any of these things. But really the thing that you might want to start doing, if you're not doing it, is focus on those questions we started with. And the main one is, am I doing what I'm best at? And if the answer is no, then probably there is something you can help yourself and your team with. And it might take the form of tooling, or it might take the form of some conventions. So thank you very much for listening. Sorry about being a little bit over time, but I hope we enjoyed it.